pants, and I don't like pants in here. Good. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the Critical Minerals Breakout Session. My name is Anthony. I work in the U.S. Southcom Operations Division, and I'll be the moderator for today's breakout session. Today with me, I have Ms. Manaz Khan from the Silverado Policy Accelerator Group, Yamali Bastian, consultant and former Southcom alumni, and I have Ms. Kirsten Brewer, I said that right? Mm-hmm. Right, CEO of Hydrograph Inc., and I have Ali Rahman, CEO of Lexi Lithium Technologies. And we'll go through, and each of the speakers can give themselves an introduction.
Sure. As Anthony said, my name is Manaz Khan. I'm the Vice President of Policy for Silverado Policy Accelerator. We're a DC-based geopolitical think tank heavily engaged in critical minerals.
Thank you so much. I'm Yamali Bastian. I'm a retired diplomat, and I'm the founder of Fulcrum Ventures, and we are affiliated with a consulting firm in Washington called TTSE. We are linking small mining operations in Latin America with potential investors and buyers in the U.S. and Canada.
And I am Kirsten Brewer, President and CEO of Hydrograph Clean Power. I have a background in materials science and engineering. We are a Canadian public company, but we have a very unique production process, which operationally is based in the U.S., where we effectively have an explosion synthesis method for the production of graphene, which, of course, is not exactly a mineral, but it can vastly reduce our dependence on various minerals.
Ali Rahman. I'm many years in natural resources. I wear many different hats. I think here today I'm in my capacity as President and CEO of Lexi, and also as a senior fellow here at the Gordon Institute. Great. Thank you to the panel. So as today we'll be talking about the minerals, metals, and materials. These are the building blocks of critical technologies to both the private and the defense sector. And they are also critical into the development of future technologies and economic security for nations throughout the world. This has become a geopolitical lever that has been utilized extensively by China in the current competition space. And the demand for minerals is expected to grow significantly in the coming years as we move for alternative energy solutions and a transition to cleaner energies. Right, so thank you for attending, and we will start off with a little bit of the geopolitical importance as it's relative to the minerals, the materials, and the supply chains, and how U.S. policy shapes our attitude, and then how that spreads across with our partnerships within Latin America and the Caribbean. So I will hand it over to Ms. Manaz Khan on a little background on how does control over critical minerals impact the global power dynamics.
It's a loaded question, but I'll break it down very simply. So anybody knows that China is the dominant processor for critical minerals, and you have to look at it from two approaches. China is using a vertical integration strategy for their critical minerals. That means that they're going from the upstream part. They're trying to get all the minerals within their own borders and abroad so that they can be competitive in their downstream sectors. And that includes semiconductors, defense, high-tech technologies like AI and quantum computing. And that's directly in their Made in 2025 China initiative. So they've already gotten the upstream minerals and in lots of regions, including Africa. Now they're going into South America, and so they've secured that supply chain. At Silverado, we looked at where we are most exposed to for these critical minerals, because there are 50 of them. And what we did is we came away with an analysis. We looked at the net import reliance from China and Russia, and the China share of global processing and mining worldwide for every single critical mineral. And we call these strategic defense critical minerals. So this is where our exposure risk is most high. And you're looking at the minerals, and they include rare earths, including scandium and yttrium, defense minerals, including tantalum and tungsten, germanium, gallium, and graphite, which are used for semiconductors, and other minerals such as arsenic, indium, antimony, and bismuth, also used in ammunition as well. And what's interesting is that China put export controls on 11 of these 12 strategic defense critical minerals. And back in December, they put outright export bans on antimony, germanium, and gallium. And those export bans are just targeted towards the United States. And that was before President Trump came into office, before we have this tariff war. Just last month, China also put export controls on 7 medium and heavy rare earths. Those are rare earths we don't make here. So Elon Musk is worried about where he's getting his rare earths for his robots. It's because China put a restriction on these type of rare earths. Now, we do make some rare earths, the light rare earths here, but China is very strategic in how they place these rare earths. They also put 125% tariff on rare earths. That just came down today, surprisingly, so they know how to restrict the supply. The other thing that China does, and that's relevant to this hemisphere, is that they use a mineral-to-port strategy. They've used it in Africa, so they seek out mineral corridors such as DRC, such as Zambia, Angola, and they have ownership stake in the ports that are there. And we see them doing this also in this hemisphere with Peru. They have a ownership stake in the Chancay port, and they want to build a railway all the way to that port to Brazil, to have a transatlantic system secure. And they also own the niobium and tantalum, and are looking at having more stake in those minerals as well, so they can secure the routes for their processing. So when you're talking about geopolitics, it's worldwide, and we have to pay very close attention to what's happening here in this hemisphere as well.
Thank you. Yamali?
Thank you. I will continue on what Manaz just presented about the mineral corridors. You'll notice a pattern that when China has invested in critical minerals extraction in a particular location, they will then begin investing in infrastructure development. So that could be ports, that could be rail, it could be energy. So all of these are to facilitate the extraction and the export of those minerals. So that's something key that we're looking at. But also, this is relevant for in geopolitics, because if you look at all of the elements of power, diplomatic power, informational power, military power, economic power, resources and minerals specifically touch on all of those. And China has not been shy in the past in exerting its influence, specifically with rare earth elements, to further its foreign policy aims. So we're very aware of that, and it definitely touches on some of the comments that were stated in some of the earlier sessions about economic security is national security. But then also, one point that I think is very important for geopolitics is about presence. Admiral Halsey spoke about presence means power. Mining areas, by definition, are in usually very remote areas. China has been very active in subnational diplomacy throughout the world, very actively in Latin America, whereas most of the U.S. diplomatic and informational interactions and representation is in the capitals, in the embassies. And so, by definition, we're absent from these areas. And so that is that's something for us to watch, and that's something for us to just to be aware of what effect that has on our influence in the region. Thank you.
You're welcome. And real quick, I want to jump over to Ali real quick, and then we're going to tie it off with Kirsten, because I think she's in a very unique place to tie this one off. Ali.
So in terms of just talking about the way in which geopolitics affect critical minerals? I mean, I sit in the private sector, right? So historically, the private sector was the tip of the spear for the American project abroad. And particularly, I come out of the oil sector. And before that, I'm a lawyer and the son of a diplomat. So I got into natural resources because of the way in which certain natural resources were essential to geopolitics and geostrategy. Got into oil because of that, because historically for the last 100 years we built our civilization around the hydrocarbon, and then it became the most important natural resource in the world. 4 years ago when I got into lithium, it was under the premise that we were going to have an energy transition, and lithium would play potentially a similar role to what the hydrocarbon played over the last 40 years. I've been at this conference the last 4 years, and this is like a Groundhog's Day. I keep coming back and saying the same things, and in the 4 years that I've been having these conversations here and in Washington, at all of our, let's say, the most important departments in our government that deal with these issues, all I've seen from my vantage on the ground in Argentina in particular, but elsewhere, is that China has increased its lead. It's increased its lead both in terms of the control over the minerals in the ground, but most importantly, it has increased its lead and leveraged its lead over the critical part of the supply chain, which is the processing of these metals and minerals. I mean, you can't stick dirt into a battery, right? You have to take that dirt, extract lithium from it, and then process it from there. And so, you know, where I sit is the questions regarding the West's capacity to not simply identify a problem, right, a geostrategic problem concerning natural resources, but the ability to identify it and then implement along the steps necessary to address that problem. Somewhere along the lines, we get lost in, you know, even forget about the policy prescription, but the implementation of those policy prescriptions and the capacity to, because this can't be, you know, you don't snap your fingers and implement or redress or ameliorate some sort of issue. You have to, it takes concerted effort, it takes time, an investment both of political capital and you know, monetary capital, physical capital, intellectual capital to do so. And, you know, from my vantage, are very concerned about the capacity for the implementation of the steps necessary to redress this ever-widening gulf, I would say, between China and the West and with regards to these critical minerals and metals.
Thank you, Ollie. So as we state the geopolitical importance and the massive lever that China has within the Americas, in that time, the drive, right, that drives a need. And some companies in technology advancements, in energy advancements, have leapt forward. And I think Kirsten and Hydrograph, right, they didn't necessarily identify that vulnerability on purpose, but there was a space for an alternative. And I'll pass it over to Kirsten for that alternative.
Sure, thank you. And so I might start off by saying that most experts believe that, you know, to fully electrify our economies, we do not have at our disposal enough rare earth minerals. And so even in the best case scenario where we have collaboration and countries are working together, we do have an issue. So in my view, we need to look towards emerging technologies. We have to innovate to really pass this hurdle. And, you know, we can draw parallels, you know, with oil and gas and more. And so with Hydrograph, I'll speak from my experience, but the point I want to make is not just about Hydrograph as a company, it is really about these emerging technologies. So we're not trying to make graphene. Dr. Sorensen out of Kansas State University was studying aerosol gels. He was exploding different hydrocarbon gases. He tried acetylene and oxygen and realized that he had produced pristine graphene. And so I'm sure most of the room has heard of graphene. It's our strongest, most conductive material ever discovered. And why this is important, because what we're mostly using graphene for, we have a lot of interest in defense, aerospace, automotive. We're putting it in nylon PA6 fibers, energy storage devices, biosensors. But for the purpose of this conversation, you can drastically change material properties by adding a very, very small amount of graphene. So theoretically, a one atomic layer on copper can so fundamentally alter its conductivity, then therefore you don't require as much copper. As we grow and as we, again, electrify our economies, that is going to be critically important. We do not have nearly enough access to these rare minerals. So I think that, it's very exciting for us because, again, this is, as a lot of the best things in science, it was a kind of unintentional thing. And I think importantly, if you go to the production process that we have effectively, theoretically unlimited production capacity because we're using acetylene gas, which is synthetically produced. We blow it up, so we have virtually no energy requirement, and we have all American manufacturing. So we are a Canadian public company, but we have moved fully operationally to the US, so we have just announced a large-scale Texas facility. And I think, technologies like this, and we're not the only ones in this space, there are lots of new and very, very exciting technologies that can, again, I think that as we look, because I know this was a hot topic earlier, I'm fully in favor of onshoring manufacturing, but I think what makes America strong is our technology and our scientific background. We should be trying to onshore these types of manufacturing processes. We don't need to bring everything, back to the US, but these critically important industries, I think that we should really be funding and really heavily support those.
Thank you. And on also the geopolitical importance on that over-reliance on China, as Manaz pointed out, not just from where the raw materials stand, but it's also that vertical integration, which gets into supply chains, right? And that makes it very difficult, that control over that. The market is unstable at best to get into there. But even looking at policy that drives supply chains, that drives material extraction, the permitting process, even from a higher level interest point for those minerals and materials, Manaz, do you have any insight where our policy with partners' policies, where they best line up?
In terms of how other countries see
How other countries view it, whether it's, extraction in the midstream process or refinement, what policies do the U.S. with any partners internationally or specifically in Latin America, where do you think we line up that we're best suited?
I think with this administration in particular, we're still in a wait-and-see approach on partners, and I will say I worked for 14 years in government doing trade policy, and I left under the Biden administration, and they had they wanted to do a lot of partnerships. They wanted to do more critical mineral agreements with our partners. Just the politics wasn't there in terms of doing more critical mineral agreements. We did one with U.S. and Japan for the IRA, and then there was just this kind of backlash. I think in this administration, there definitely is a focus on domestic mining and processing at the moment. So that kind of has put a stall on where our partnerships will go going forward. But it did say in the Unleashing American Energy order, the executive order that came out right after the inauguration, that they wanted to use, this administration wanted to use the Quad for critical minerals diplomacy. So we've been advising the administration and the Hill on how to use Quad, but we're really looking at it as a Quad plus partnership. So bringing in countries like Peru, Argentina, Canada, Mexico into this Quad plus partnership for critical mineral engagement and having those plurilateral critical mineral sector-specific deals that this administration wants to do. So I think right now the focus is domestic, but because this administration has said in their trade policy that they're looking at bilateral and plurilateral deals, we are trying to advise them on where to go for this going forward and looking again at this hemisphere. First, we need to integrate Canada and Mexico and have an agreement there, and then we can move forward with other partners in South and Central America.
Thank you. And Yamali is a Foreign Service officer and
right?
the extensive background.
Right.
It's your
this
turn.
is- Yeah, where we see that there's a lot of interest on the part of Latin American countries is to add value in the production. So they don't want to just extract and export raw materials, they want to actually process it in country. But there are a number of limiting factors to that. In order to be able to process their very big energy needs. And as one of the speakers mentioned earlier, the cost of energy in a lot of Latin American countries is significantly higher than in the US. So that's definitely a limiting factor. Right now, where there is such a strong focus on developing US capacity to mine, specifically for critical minerals, I think that the capacity is there, the reserves are there, but the process for getting them online, the permitting process, takes a very long time. And also getting community support and buy-in for processing facilities is also a challenge in the U.S. So I think that if it's possible to look at the partner countries like the Quad Plus, targeted countries that are producing, let's say, strategic defense critical minerals that are available in Latin America, and where there could be small processing facilities. These are relatively small investments that could be made in these countries. They could do some of the basic processing, get a more, I guess, concentrated mineral to export to the U.S. So that already lowers the costs for the U.S. importers. And then that way we can focus on production and permitting for whatever minerals we're not able to secure or source in the Western Hemisphere. So I don't think that the priorities are divergent. I think definitely the source countries want to be able to add as much value as they can, secure employment for their populations as much as they can. And this is where I see that a lot of them want to partner with the U.S. I have conversations with mine owners probably once or twice a month who are looking to sell their mines, and they're not finding American buyers. They're not finding Western investors. But the Chinese investors are very much present. And, you know, so the interest is there in partnering with us, but the U.S. investors and the U.S. buyers need to also be present.
Thank you. Kirsten? Any?
In what context would you like me to respond to this one?
As we look at, the supply chain, almost diversification, is, as you being the CEO and president of a company, right, you are also reliant on buying products and in order to develop your technologies. What would you like to see from the U.S. government effort as far as supply chain security to ensure that your business that we're working for you?
I think that's a good question. There's obviously a lot of nuance there because, again, we're in a very lucky position where we have effectively two feedstocks. We use acetylene gas, which is produced in Texas, and then oxygen, which is also produced there. Funny enough, you know, Dr. Sorensen is a Vietnam vet, and all the components in our reactor are all made in America. We all know that supply chains are much more complex than I think we would think at first glance. So I do think that that is going to have some effect. I'm sure our future reactors, just due to tariffs, are going to be a little bit more expensive than we're currently calculating now. But theoretically, at least, what we have is very simple. And I think that, again, just going back to my earlier point, I think there's a lot of opportunity, I would say, in funding. Maybe this is now branching out apart from just hydrograph, because what I would really like to see going past production is more support within research. I see that, for example, the UK, where graphene was discovered in 2004, they've developed a very, very strong ecosystem with a lot of the advanced material expertise. All the equipment is really under one roof. And the funny thing is that I was introduced to the US military at that UK laboratory that we have. And I think that the US government has picked up on a lot of the things that they've done right in terms of innovation. And for one, I mean, America is leading the world in terms of innovation, but I think some of these new industries, graphene is one of them, especially if it's been discovered in another country. I like to think that America can take that and learn from it quickly. So we have now been reached out by the DevCom team, so I believe they're going to be starting one of these innovation hubs now for graphene and nanomaterial-related research, hopefully working with Hydrograph, but here within the US. And I like to see more and more of that, because I think the more we can collaborate, the more we have, fundamental scientific understanding of what future technologies can do. I think it's going to be a big benefit to everyone.
Sure. And Ollie, if we combine these two, this is big lift in your arena with your experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what the government can do is maybe have a coherent industrial policy. I mean, that from my perspective, right? So we have perspective or development mines in Argentina, and there is. I mean, you're competing with. We all know the Chinese have put sufficient resources behind supporting their companies in this space, and to that end have developed the entire value chain, right? The vertically integrated. Again, I step back and analogize this to the oil business. Early on, one of the let's say the signature cooperation between private industry and the government was the Anglo-Iranian oil company, today's BP, right? Where Admiral Fisher at one point came to who was then Vice Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, and said, Churchill said, how can we compete with the Germans? And they said, well, we need to scrap our coal fleet and switch over to oil. And in order to do that, they understood that they needed to have a secure source of supply. And what did they do? They went and they invested they took the golden share of Anglo-Iranian, which became BP, gave the support to that company, that industry itself, right? That ecosystem that was being developed there, because we now take for granted that oil is a $4 trillion a year industry, that it's, there's these, runs the world. But at the time, these are nascent industries that require support, right? To see them through. Commodities are always subject to business cycles, to investment cycles, to pricing cycles, and that support was critical to seeing that through. Again, the same thing was done by the U.S. government in Aramco. If you go back and one of the great books ever written on any natural resource was The Prize by Daniel Yergin, which was made at a certain later into a miniseries in the 90s. You go back and listen to the interviews that were done with the original Aramco guys and the way in which they spoke about how they worked hand in glove with the State Department, with the Defense Department and the like, to see that company through its development in Saudi Arabia. That is there is no analogous situation today in any of these critical minerals and metal sectors. Zero. So, the question is we have to take a policy decision. What is in our interest, and how do we support the industry and our companies to develop the resiliency to see it through the normal investment cycles. That's, amongst many
Well
other.
said.
Yes.
Thank you, Ollie. That was great. So as we look at the geopolitical importance and the political and economic levers that can be utilized in the mineral space and the supply chains, and then as Ollie tied off, then we get to investment, and whether that's either investment security, investment guarantee, right, how is the U.S. and the Americas within the Western Hemisphere, where are we going to inject ourselves in this process? The Center for Strategic and International Studies has touted in a few studies the idea of a kind of a dual market index for either getting cleaner, more ESG compliant minerals, because China is not very concerned with that, in order to give more incentives and subsidies instead of broad subsidies. That is said, it can't be done. I don't necessarily agree or disagree with that. I don't know enough about it, but there almost seems to be a chance that that can be done if you were to look at alternative means of minerals or technologies that drive critical components or additive manufacturing processes that we need, like hydrograph. That definitely sets them up for a dual index advantage, right, that gains the Americas the advantage. So I was just wondering if you had any thought on that or how that could work.
I think the way I see it is we're 40 years behind China on critical minerals development. And I really see it in what we call at Silverado a four-pronged approach. It's mining, processing, recovery, and innovation. And the latter two is what's going to help us leapfrog above China. So Kristen's company is the innovation part of that supply chain. We do see that this administration on the funding piece is, reorganizing the funding, especially with DOD using a national security rationale to do the mining and processing here. But what we don't see, and there's still policy and funding gaps on the recovery and innovation that was under Biden, and we need more of the funding piece there, and we need to do that with our partners, especially with, on the innovation for mining and processing with that equipment. We don't make a lot of that here. Australia and Canada do. They have that know-how. China definitely has that know-how, so working with our partners on that front. On the recovery piece, and I call it recovery, it's really recycling, reusing, circularity. That's what this administration is calling it. But we entered into a strategic mineral recovery initiative with India. So we need to do more of those R&D type of investments on recovering, trying to take the minerals out of tailings, trying to figure out how we take it out more cheaply from end-use products, and do that again with our partners. They are partners in the developing world and in this hemisphere too that are better recyclers than the United States when it comes to these type of technologies. So working with them, but I think more of the funding and the policies need to be on those two latter pieces as well. And we're diving into that at Silverado with our partners and looking at, because that's, again, as I said, that's the way to leapfrog China, is to innovate our way out of the problem.
Yeah, and I know earlier you had asked about upstream, midstream, or downstream, and where should the investments be. I think it really should be everywhere. It needs to be all of the above. But what investors really look for is certainty. They need clarity, they need certainty, and with the permitting process being as long as it is, it's very hard for investors to see what's happening 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when a mine is still trying to get their permits in the US. But growing investments upstream is critical because it helps us to identify new opportunities. That's an area where a lot of times local companies will do some basic investments, and then once they've confirmed that they have mineral reserves in a particular location, and they've done the testing, they have the verified reserves, at that point they look to sell. And that's where a lot of times you see Chinese companies buying up these small mines and then sort of consolidating them. So I think that we need to be much more actively pursuing that, much more actively seeking out those kinds of opportunities. The administration has been very actively promoting the Development Finance Corporation as a tool to support investments in critical minerals, both overseas as well as in the U.S., which would be an expansion of its authorities and capabilities, and I think that that's a very welcome change. The Export-Import Bank has also offered some new capabilities where a foreign mine that has offtake agreements with U.S. industry could qualify for support from the Export-Import Bank. So these are great initiatives that are coming up and that I think will be expanded further. But at the same time, we really need to look at how to unleash private sector investment in this area. Because if we're fully dependent on government agencies to make these investments, whenever there's a change, a political change from one administration to the next, that could stifle the ongoing development of the sector. So looking at how to engage with the private sector, private equity in the US has a lot of dry powder, a lot of money in reserve that has not been allocated to specific projects. That's an area where they could be brought in to provide the support. Another area that I think has not been explored enough, and where I see a lot of opportunity, is with family offices. Family offices can make independent decisions. They have very patient capital. They can make long-term investment decisions, and there's no publicly available number that tells us how much dry powder there is in the private family office space. But if you look at just the amount of assets under management of these firms, it's in the trillions of dollars. And so I think that's an area where we need to also reach out and get some, or mobilize some finance and investment into this sector.
Thank you. And with the, and before I don't want to move on, Ali, do you have anything, Kirsten?
Well, I mean, we mentioned the IFC, right? The IFC, they have their own restrictions on what level, where in the investment cycle they can make these investments. And what they've done is they hamstrung themselves to make investments at a point in which these investments are, are investment grade returns. And so they're essentially becoming competing with private capital, where they should be focused and where they would bring the most bang for the most results, most bang for the buck, is moving it for where actually these type of strategic projects need the capital, which is early in the investment cycle, and where there is not a huge amount of private capital available for it because of risk profile, where the U.S. can take that risk, more than some sort of fund generally. So, or for example, the IRA, where the other, our other set of policy initiative that was supposed to drive these things, we only gave the credits for countries for critical minerals and metals, either producing in the United States or countries with whom we have a free trade agreement. So we've essentially cut off, I don't know, what, 80% of the world from this type of support. In fact, when we should be, those countries with whom we have a free trade agreement are generally ones we have very close trade relationships with, and those we don't are ones that we want to bring into our orbit. So here we are, we've excluded those type of countries where China's out there competing, where they're making these type of investments, where they're supporting their companies, and we have self-censored ourselds by restricting who is eligible for this stuff. So we've taken, again, the U.S. government, in many instances, has taken, in my opinion, the wrong approach. They've set up the right institutions, the right sort of things, and then made decisions there along the side that decrease the capacity for their effectiveness. So, this requires a rethink and real engagement with the private sector, who will help them identify where these type of policies can be reoriented to make them more effective. But I know that everybody here has had these conversations in government. It's just, that whether their capacity to implement the policy, the recommendations that have been given seems to be lacking on the whole.
Thanks, Ali. So as we look at, again, the geopolitical levers, the supply chain security, and a little bit of the financing, this is all crucial to driving new technologies, right? And that's where the Americas and our partners, that is where we shine in innovation, in development. Also with that, right, comes the intellectual property theft and vulnerabilities, right? China is also hitting us on that, forend in both the physical and in the digital domain through cyber attacks and various actors. Kirsten, as the president and CEO of your company, how important is that to you? What does the future look like for safeguarding this very, amazing technology that you guys have developed?
Critically important, and I'm asked this frequently, as you can imagine, by shareholders. So, I think the issue is there's very little a smaller company could do should there be a bad actor somewhere in China trying to go around our patents. At the end of the day, it's extremely difficult to find, and it's very, very difficult to fight. But I think, moving forward, and especially as we grow, and obviously we don't have any indication that is going on, but our IP is our value. As I mentioned, theoretically it's simple what we do, but in practice it's very, very difficult to generate the graphene that we do without, for example, blowing up a reactor. So that has really been, our learning curve, and really what we have a lot of trade secrets on. And I think that moving forward, because as I've mentioned, we have been working with the U.S. military, and I think to the best of our ability, we want to safeguard our data. We want to make sure that the scientists that we hire are not sharing information. As you can imagine, we have a very diverse set of scientists. Most of them are not born in the U.S. We have teams in the UK, we have teams here. And I think that especially within the materials space, I do see a lot of foreign talent. And I think that, again, America is the best of the best for science, technology, and innovation, but in some sectors it can start to fall behind. And I think that maintaining our, priority on STEM education and really, pushing for more and more young people to study science, I think is going to continue to be important. But I think, to hydrograph's best ability, we just need to avoid any information getting into the wrong hands.
Good. Ali, anything for?
Well, I would ask Kristen, to what extent are the current policy decisions being made to both restrict foreign students from coming over to study in the United States who have a preponderance to go into STEM technologies, and to cut some of the funding for those type of research at our great research universities like Kansas State, going to affect possibly the U.S. as our colleague said here. We're going to out-innovate. Generally, where we can compete is on technology and innovation, and seems that we may be hamstringing ourselves on that part of the curve where we are best positioned to compete our competitors.
It's extremely challenging. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? I'm saying on one hand, we want to be, hyper aware of any information being leaked to another country. But for example, my top scientist is a Chinese national, and so he's in the UK lab, and that's obviously a negative for the US government. And I think that is really, really challenging, because when I'm hiring, most of the great candidates, I hate to say it like that, don't happen to be from the US. So I think that it's really something to juggle, and I think, again, having the right process behind that and having the right groups that you partner with, it's just whether it's data, whatever it's going to be, I think that if you're doing things in the right way, as an immigrant myself, obviously from Canada, I don't think that should be a negative. So I'm fully for, collaboration. I hope we can maintain these H-1B visas and other visas that would allow, high-level talent to come in from other countries. I think, again, that's one of the things that does make America great. And I think that as long as a company is being responsible in its ability to manage that talent, that's really, I think, what it comes down to.
And Manaz, as Silverado does handle a great deal of critical technology portfolios, how important do you see the current administration, or how can we go forward with that IP protection responsibly?
I think as we're making trade agreements with other countries, that we need to have those robust IP protections embedded in those agreements. So basically telling a country, if you want to partner with us, you have to have the same IP standards. I used to do a lot of this when I was working at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. And that includes technology transfer agreements, that includes safeguarding our data as well as theirs, et cetera. So I think if you have those embedded, and when you have a FTA or an agreement, you're always staying on top of that partner for the deficiencies in that agreement every time you're going to the negotiating table, every time you're having a bilateral agreement. So making sure that there's accountability in the system, and that having, I guess, expiration dates or renewal dates for certain agreements if those conditions are not being met, especially on the IP front. But it's very, very challenging, especially for developing countries on what Kirsten said, trying to maintain those IP things. But I think setting the standard upfront on what we will accept with the partner and what we won't accept is key.
So with a lot of partners within Latin America and the Caribbean, we do have some reciprocity and some technology trade standards and initiatives. Yamali, throughout the Southcom AOR, what do you think the proposed future for technology innovation, technology hubs and partnering with other nations? What does that look like? How can we do it better?
Great, thank you for the question. I think there are a lot of areas where we have the opportunity to innovate. We speak a lot about technological innovation in this space, so there's capacity to innovate on extraction methods, on processing methods, even looking at recycling, sort of recapturing minerals or trace minerals from contaminated mine sites and tailings. And so all of these are ways that we can improve or innovate in the production method. But I think also we have to look at not just the extraction of existing minerals, but also looking at alternatives to existing technologies. So there's a lot of research that's being done on alternatives to lithium-ion batteries. Looking at cobalt and copper and iron and other forms of battery-powered technology that, maybe they're more abundant, maybe they're easier to access, maybe more economical to extract. So I think there will be a lot of innovation in the technology space, but I think we also have an opportunity to innovate on processes. And that's where I think that our partnerships in Latin America can be really important. Looking at, just within the US, where our permitting process is very lengthy, it's very complex, and a miner has to deal with, X number of government agencies over the course of many years just to get their permits. I think that there's an opportunity to innovate there where the process can be streamlined, but it can also be done like as a single window. In a lot of countries, single windows have been very effective in trade facilitation, in the creation of businesses, so that the business owner, instead of having to go to multiple agencies, just goes to one portal, and all of that sort of collaboration and interface between the different government agencies happens behind the scenes, but the individual doesn't necessarily have to go through all of that. So, and being able to develop that as let's say, a portal that the business owner can access to see what the status of their application is something that, it's done in a lot of other sectors. It hasn't really been explored in this area, but I think that there's definitely an opportunity to innovate there. Actually, in Africa, where there has been a lot of experience with major mining companies developing very effective community relation programs and livelihood support and education and workforce development programs. We have a lot of good examples there that could potentially be replicated in Latin America. Not only for the large mining companies, the large multinationals, but even some of the smaller mining companies can develop community relations programs that make the communities more receptive to working with them. Because ultimately the community relations is always a key piece. We see that where that breaks down, an entire project can fall apart. And so I think that those are areas where we could have some innovation in the region.
Thank you. This was a broad topic to kind of cover all the wickets of it. We have just about over 5 minutes left. So I'd like to open it up to any questions, hear anyone attending this panel for anything. Yes, ma'am.
Always. I will say, our US team that has really built the technology from the patents that we license from Kansas State, we do maintain that those are American citizens, at least for the time being. Our scientist in the UK, it's a little bit more complicated because he's working more on application development data. So he has worked with the UK Ministry of Defense, for example, on nylon fibers. That gets to be a bit of nuance when you do move forward with DoD contracts or maybe the UK Ministry of Defense, because even managing those projects, they're very cautious of information being shared. But my biggest concern is the fundamental technology. As long as that is secure, if there's data on how we perform in a specific material, that's not exactly a threat to hydrograph. It might be a threat to the government institution we're working with, but for us, it's a little bit less scary. But again, I'm sure we're going to have to find ways around that as we grow because it is a developing situation.
Yes, ma'am.
I can't comment to that one myself.
Yeah, I can comment just on a couple of small projects that I've observed where as there's more transparency and more of a light that's shown on the sector, I think that sort of crowds out any kind of sort of bad actors and abusive practices. In some of the countries where we're working, we're seeing that the governments are putting in place very strong regulations on community relations, environmental standards, and the companies that want to go in have to be compliant with that. So what I've observed, at least for some of the small and medium-sized companies that I've been working with, is that they take these commitments very seriously. They do the community consultation meetings before they get their permits. This is something that they have to do on a regular basis. They have to get these sort of social contracts renewed on a regular basis. And so the need to establish a strong partnership with the local community is very much top of mind. And I think that for a lot of the Western companies, that is a priority. In a lot of the media, there's talk about ESG kind of falling out of favor and all of that. But I think in many ways, it does continue to permeate decision-making for companies. It might be called by different things, corporate social responsibility or community engagement or other things, but I think it is still a selling point, certainly for Western companies. Most of the countries where we work in Latin America have American Chambers of Commerce that put out a list of, let's say, best places to do business or best places to work, for instance. And American companies tend to fare very well on those lists. So I think the labor practices, the respect for the environmental practices that the host country government implements, I think are things that these companies take seriously. On dealing with other companies from other countries, I'm not sure about the adherence to that, but at least with the US and Canadian companies that I've worked with, that's been a high priority.
And thank you for your question. That was an easy one, right? But as we wrap it up, right, with the race for critical resources, materials to drive technologies of the modern world, there will be flashpoints, right? It will exacerbate existing geopolitical tensions. We will develop new ones, right, and make scars over those. And it will, we're going to fail along the way. To say, policy is going to be perfect every time and we'll get there, it will not. Resource-rich areas that are underdeveloped as far as security apparatus go, They will have unfair trade practices that we will have to identify and then have a whole new effort to supplement that as they materialize. National security-based restrictions on immigration, on industrial-based policy will affect private companies like Hydrograph and Lexi. The environment will change, right? But with the current market, with it being so volatile, so unpredictable, it is very unsuitable for U.S. Western private sector appetite. And that's something that we're, as a whole of nation at a minimum, are trying to overcome. Our competitors' monopoly on extraction and refinement is eroding, right, at our industrial base, not just on the defense side, but on the, on the commercial side as well. And that's going to determine who we do business with and to what degree. And that'll be, another problem when it materializes will go. And that is just on terrestrial mining. We haven't even delved into the emerging deep sea ocean bed mining and all of those implications where maybe, Ollie, in the next 5 years, we'll have something and we'll circle back again and we'll talk about that. But again, that's our time for today. Thank you to the panelists, right? Thank you to speakers for your time. It was great, and thank you for everyone attending.